Hello, loves. Welcome back. I am beyond excited to be sitting here with my very special guest, Jeremy Niednagel, if I'm saying that
Well
correctly,
done.
right?
That's right.
That is the director of Beyond Personality, who has spent more than 20 years working alongside his father, that is the founder of Brain Typing, Jonathan Niednagel, a devoted follower of Christ, husband to his wife, Danielle, and a father of six. Jeremy is deeply passionate about helping people understand how God has uniquely designed them, starting with the brain and how we think and move, which I love. I talk about all the time. Through a blend of neuroscience, biblical insight, and real life experiences, his work has served families, couples, churches, schools, and leaders around the world with a heart of clarity, connection, and love for others' well being. We are so excited to have this conversation with you today. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to talk to you, Renee.
So, our practices that are a little bit different, but so similar, which roots back to who God intended us to be, to figure out our true DNA through all the ups and downs and hurdles and things like that. I'm so excited to be having this conversation because when we match people, it's important to know who they are individually to find them somebody that's equally yoked and compatible. So let's get
Certainly.
started because I've got a ton of questions I want to ask you, and we'll probably have to have you on for a 2.0 version of this with our audience questions too. So to kick it off, can you tell our audience what brain typing is exactly?
Well, to say it succinctly, I would say that it started off with the Myers-Briggs information. So it was really a psychology at first, a psychological approach. And we felt my father is the pioneer of it, as you said, or I think you noted. Basically, over time, we felt that there had to be a neuroscientific underpinning to what we observed in the psychological traits. So brain typing really is a way of taking psychology to the next level and measuring it with what we know about the brain. And so we still have 16 types as the Myers-Briggs information has, but we have since translated that information to be more brain descriptive. And we've said for 30 years now that it's an inborn, indelible way of identifying different patterns of how God has designed brains. And so we call it brain typing, which is pretty self-explanatory. But brain typing really is just a way of identifying how you think and how you move and how those go together. And we can prove it through either means by explaining how you are in an intellectual way or how you are in a physical, athletic, how it manifests itself that way. So it's really a safe way to evaluate people because it's a way you can prove it one way or the other, and you don't have to just take my word for it. So that was kind of a roundabout way of explaining it, but I would just say that brain typing is much more than brain typing. I think it's the whole person. It's not just your brain, but it also relates to gender. It relates to handedness and some other factors too. So.
Yeah, and you work with some of the elite NFL or professional players in the regards of sports, right?
Right. So really we've been working in pro sports for almost 30 years, and all the top pro sports. We're presently working in the NBA and the NFL. And I would say that's really the reason why people don't haven't really heard about us much is because we do no self-promoting, we don't do any advertising. For all this time, really we've made our income from helping in the sports world because there's a lot of money there, there's a lot of need there, but it's not where our hearts are as Christians, honestly, and that helping people, families, individuals is way more rewarding and what we feel God is calling us to. So I'm here today kind of in a new capacity because I'm working on a new book and we want to take this to families more than we have in the past. And so yeah, really that's been our calling card has been sports, but obviously sports don't do a whole lot for people's souls. So so I'm really excited.
Well, I also say it's great to also lead them on faith because it kind of
Yeah.
walks them there because we know everything decision wise we make, especially on the game. You got to be focused and you need to know, your own brain well enough of how you make decisions to be good.
Yes. And also I wanted to jump in head first when I was in my early 20s with my dad and go work for teams and do great things with brain typing. Here I am in my late 40s now, and I'll just say that I can see how God has providentially used it where I have six kids. I grew up with the information from the time I was around 11 or 12. And then now that I've parented six kids, I have one daughter married, I've definitely been able to live out how brain typing can work in a family and how you can use it in parenting. And I wouldn't have known that earlier. So I can kind of see, or not kind of, but I can really see how God has used it in my own life to be able to be an advocate for this information, but in a balanced way with with more discernment than I would have had. And so really, I'm very passionate about this information, but not just excited, but even having lived it, it's meant a lot more to me. And now that's why I'm wanting to share it with everybody that we can, you know.
Well, and 6 kids, I mean, God bless
Yeah.
you. That is a lot of personalities all in one. What is
Yeah.
the age range of your children?
4 to 21.
That's a lot. That is a lot of personalities. So it's a gift from God that He equipped you with that,
I
right?
really, yeah, I've told many people I really believe that our children have been our laboratory. And I don't treat them as such, but that has really been the backstory of it, to just learn so much by raising them. So
That's awesome. I love it. So you know what you're talking about for sure. Okay, do you see a common thread with your beyond personality clients from professional athletes to engage couples and how you are able to help them?
yes. Well, it depends on what they want to achieve. So we over the years, I think what we've learned is that to become actualized is everyone's goal. And actualization really is just becoming self-aware. If you're familiar with AA and how they help people, you know, you recognize you have a problem in order to deal with it. In our sphere, it's more of recognizing who you are, not what you want to be, but really who you are, and then dealing with that accordingly so that you can become your best self, you know, the way God intended. So I would say that that's been the common thread. Is doesn't matter if it's an athlete or a couple seeking to get married. You know, we just try to help them identify, be able to look in the mirror and say, okay, this is how God made me. And that's good news. If there's something I see here that I don't like, that's something that I can give attention to. And that's what we try to encourage people is it's not we're not always popular for telling them sometimes things that they might have to reevaluate about themselves, but we believe that that's the most important thing is to start with the truth and work from there.
Absolutely. I always tell everybody you got to go back to your utero, to who you are today to understand your highlight reel, right? And the
Yeah,
version of what you do. But I mean, our brain is our strongest muscle in the regards we have that it's important to continue to exercise it, probably, I'm sure you would say, after we discover this, because if we let it go to mush, no different than working out, we revert back into our habits.
absolutely. Yeah, we
Um, okay, we are a big fan of the Myers-Briggs. And I always say, because it's like the godfather of assessments out there, the letters kind of make sense for the majority. And it's just, if everybody takes the same, it's like comparing apples to apples. So on that type of indicator, where do you see the MBTI as helpful in navigating self-awareness and relationship readiness?
well, I think it all has to do with how aware we are of ourselves if we're utilizing that information to be able to correctly identify what we are, which is true for
Sure.
any of the measuring techniques that are out there. And so that's really what created the hiccup for my father. He was using personality evaluations for his work 30 plus years ago and found that even though the information he thought was solid, he felt that the appropriation of the information was flawed and that he would go to conventions and people would say, this is, they would wear the name badges, this is my type. And then after getting to know them, he would kind of see, have trouble with seeing what they thought they were with what he would observe, and that led him down a path of trying to understand why is this information so good, but why do I see such variance between people who say that this is my personality type and then they come across differently. So um, it was when he started working with children that he saw them in their more original state, and that helped him to pick up on some of the preferences and how they actually manifest themselves. But so the shorter answer to what you asked is Myers-Briggs has to do with how you see yourself, whereas brain typing has to do with who you are, and it may be difficult to understand initially, but if you take time to explore it, you'll understand that that is who you are. So persona and personality can be measured well with the Myers-Briggs, but your innate blueprint, we would say, is more what brain typing can bring to the surface. And so once you understand your brain type, then you can make sense of your personality and see if they either match or if they're different, then you can understand how your nurture has impacted your nature, and that can help you parse your whole life and make sense of what's happened and where you are today in light of that. So I think Myers-Briggs is great for measuring your personality, to say it another way, and that brain typing can measure much deeper and help you understand that the masks you wear, so to speak, your persona, Those can change, but your brain type doesn't change over time. Your brain does change. There's elasticity there that changes your whole life, but the overall tenets of your brain type do not change from birth to death. So
Right. And just a follow-up question to that, we often pair that with the five love languages by Gary Chapman, which I'm sure you know that as a
sure, yeah,
notion. Do you
yeah.
use that at all, or how do you feel like that gives us a little bit more insight, especially when it comes to dating, like what
hmm
they feel or want when it comes to love languages in that chemistry department?
Right. So we would say that there's pertinence to all the different measurements that are out there, love languages or Enneagram or go down the list. They're all helpful and they all are pertinent, but I wouldn't say that like spiritual gifts, let's say. I think brain typing relates to spiritual gifts, but one brain type doesn't equal one spiritual gift. And I think that love languages would even be probably less specific. So I think that there's a pertinence there, there's a connection there, but certain types are capable of more than one.
Sure. Well, I
So,
mean, the truth of it is really dive in to know yourself because that's the best superpower you have is understanding yourself. But then I'm going to send
yes.
everybody after this podcast over to check out you to get a deeper dive in putting it all
Sure.
together. For someone in the season of singleness or starting a new relationship, a romantic relationship, where would you tell them to start in regards to understanding brain typing and themselves?
Once you understand yourself, that's the most important place to start. But even if you can't do that accurately, if you can even get some of the aspects of your type that matter most to you, and then use those as a pivot point, then that can help you. So what I mean to say is brain typing, I can do it, let's say completely, but someone who's new to it has a harder time of handling the information accurately, but they can at least get the main things or the obvious things that they see in themselves or in the person they're interested in. And once you understand what you care most about in another person, if you can look to see what the manifestations are that are attributed to that, like if you want someone who's real relational, let's say, and then there's a brain type aspect we call animate, which is how we identify that part of the brain. If that's what you care about to find someone who's more relational, then that's the place to start. And so that way, when you're getting to know people or you're fishing, so to speak, that you can look for that trait in another person and realize it's not a choice driven trait, it's actually a brain driven trait. And that's why it's so important that you get that earlier on so that later on you don't get surprised. I mean, it's an anchor that you can hold on to about somebody, that once you understand the different manifestations of the brain type aspects, then it gives you something that's more secure so that you're not just being tossed about by all the options that are out there. So I would just say that using it in a simpler way is the only way you can do it to start off, but it's to look for the obvious traits in people that everyone can see. Really, what we do is we help people apply a system to what they have already noticed their whole lives. Like everybody, when they go in public, they notice different micro expressions or different nuances in personality, and they see those. They're not blind to those, but what we help them understand is how those are related to the brain. So it's kind of just, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling on that, but I'm just trying to say is you start simple and expand from there, with what's most important to you, and then understanding what are the biggest parts of you that you can identify. So even if you don't know your whole type, you could at least know some of the aspects of your type.
So I have a follow-up question to that. Is there a way to strategize to reprogram our brains to being more open-minded if we're more analytical? Because I find in my line of work all day long, as I always say, this is God's time, not your time. You're only one side of the equation when it comes to a romantic relationship. And it
Mhm.
does take compromise. It does take discussion, but it's not always what you imagine, which can only be your way of what you know. So I'm just curious, is there a way to definitely not brainwash, but strategize more of an openness? If I could only figure out what that recipe is to some people, my job would be so much easier.
So the question is, how do we make people more open?
Well, as you go through discovering who somebody is, is there a way for somebody that's, let's say, more analytical? And I sit with this with a lot of my just clients in general that are just more analytical, which I love. But part of falling in love is the falling part, which is not something you can prove. There's no
Mhm.
science that will, measure it in that regards, of why and when and who you'll fall in love with. My question is, as you go through this and you sit with people and you're going through their type, do you help them to also be more open to the different personality types that they come across?
Hmm. Well, there half of the types are more open naturally anyway. The other
Okay.
half that are more analytical, like you're saying, those are certain brain types that are that way. So that's a tough one because there are a lot of types that don't want to be open now or ever.
Okay. How do you see more of God's design as you study the brain?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing that we learn from it is that we've been created for community and not for just being alone in our thinking. And that once we understand the different 16 types and how they're all complementary to each other, then you can have a greater appreciation for our own limitations and our need of each other. And to be able to become the best you is not a solitary process, but one of community and being open to others' input. So I would say that is we see that beautiful symmetry with how God's created people through that. You know, when Paul talks about who we are in First Corinthians, he says, "Who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you didn't receive? And if you did receive it, why do you act as if you hadn't received it?" And I love that passage because it's the same for your brain type. Once you understand who you are, how God's made you, then you don't have an arrogance about it. You don't have a boasting about it. It's a humble acceptance of this is how He's made me. So then, therefore, whatever I'm good at, I don't have to judge other people, and I can appreciate the differences that God has made. And so I would say that really just all the aspects of community come to the surface when I look at how brain typing informs us. And then the first Peter passage I have to also mention in chapter 4, he says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others. And
Yeah.
that's really the goal of understanding yourself, is to know how can I best shine for God and serve others and love others the way that He's made me. And then how can I appreciate their differences too, instead of just being offended by their differences or disliking people because they're different from me, but really just appreciating that God, it's His clear intention in creation to have diversity, and it's the spice of life. And I think if we reject that, we reject Him.
Yeah.
So
And we wouldn't want us to all be the exact same. So every day
no,
I say, I'm
certainly
so
not.
grateful He created us to all be uniquely different, right?
Yes, that's certainly the case. And
Okay, what challenges have you helped counsel in couples with your specific communication strategies?
probably the biggest thing is this is verbiage that we got from Dr. Amen, who we used to work with quite a bit. He uses the phrases brain-driven versus choice-driven behavior, and I'm quick to point out that not everything is brain type related, even though this is, I feel, profound information that it can better everyone's lives. It's also true to say that not everything's brain type related, but if you can understand the difference between what is brain-driven versus choice driven, then you will make great headway in your relationships. So I would say that the biggest challenge is helping understand people with opposite types who really can't get themselves to accept that the other person thinks differently, not from their choices, but from their actual neuroanatomy, the pattern the brain God gave them helps them in a way, or causes them to take in information differently than they do. And so once they can understand that, then they can have a breakthrough with communication. But until then, they're always going to try to get that other person to jump across the canyon of their thinking to their own way of thinking, or their own way of hearing. And so that's the biggest challenge, really, when people have brain types that are very opposite. Dr. Robert Sapolsky is somebody I used to learn from in a lot of, used to go through a lot of his lectures, and he's a brilliant neuroscientist from Stanford, and he just wrote a book a couple years ago. So I want to read the title because it's really telling. He's a brilliant man, called Determined: A Science of Life Without Free Will. And in that book, he argues that basically there's just a chain of events in our lives that cause us to behave and act the way we do, and that really there's no free will. And I do certainly do not agree with that, but I think that there's a lot of evidence there that should humble us as far as why we do what we do and why we behave as we do. And if you can understand that there's a good scientific argument for that, then you can give a lot more credence to the differences in people around you and not be so judgmental and harsh toward the way that other people think. So my point in mentioning that is just that I would love to do a debate with Dr. Sapolsky about that. Like, how are we different if there's so much that is seemingly determined by our genetics? But suffice it to say that we know God gave us a soul and a spirit, and that alone is unique on top of some other aspects of who we are. that really we're not genetically determined. But what I'm getting at is this idea of brain-driven behavior is much bigger than people realize. We tend to act like everything's choice-driven, and it's just not. There's a whole lot of us that really is predictable. And once you get to know people, you see that more and more, right? Really how predictable they can be at times. But the beauty is that God gave us a spirit that with his spirit in us can cause great changes and great growth. And that's the thing I like to focus on, is that you're not set in cement with what your brain type is. There's great elasticity in the brain that you can change.
Well, and our brain is our most powerful tool. And I love all the research and fascination behind this because I can't wait from even just more development, bringing it to us, we sharing it with our community, because it is one of those things that if your brain's not in tune or in check, there's so many things that fall apart around you too. So I love what
Yes.
you're doing. What is the best way to learn about how your partner is wired?
Okay. Well, study them, listen to them. Listening is a lost art. I'm writing a children's book about that right now,
True.
actually. And I think if people would just learn to listen, that they would learn a lot. But that's kind of obvious, but it's also difficult for people nowadays, I think, in our generation. But when we listen to them, then we understand what makes them tick. And people are, talk to a man about himself and he will listen for hours. That's true. We love ourselves and we love to be known and loved and affirmed for who we are. So I'd say that that's the biggest key, is that when we do evaluations with people and we have a husband and wife or a couple in the room, it's amazing what the other person learns about the other when we're talking to them just because we're asking questions.
Right.
And you think, well, wait, haven't you already talked about this before? And so often they say, no, we haven't. And it's just because they maybe don't do that legwork of actually caring enough to listen to all the things that are important to them. So
Which
people
goes
really
on the
aren't.
whole theory God gave us two ears and one mouth. Listen more
Yeah,
than we
yeah.
speak, right?
Very much so. Yeah. So
I
so
love it.
yeah, it'll come to the surface. I think also is true is that when we have if we have two partners in the room talking and if one describes the other, it's usually amazing how they can describe the other person better than the person can describe themselves. And so I would say too that that's such an invaluable resource, is that if you're trying to know more about yourself, to listen to your spouse or your girlfriend or whatever the relationship is. But because people who know us and live with us, they see us very well. They really do. They might judge us and our motives wrongly, but they usually see the outside pretty well.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, we're always so quick to, put our opinion or our thoughts on somebody else than, I always say know and share our own highlight reel, because a lot of people just haven't discovered that and they don't really know, but they're quick to voice what somebody else says. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. How are those that utilize the brain typing able to benefit in their relationship with the Lord? I just love that you pair it so much with Christ and your faith and everything.
Yeah. And honestly, that's a really humbling question, because I'm quick to say that, brain typing, you don't need that to grow, to be in love with the Lord and to serve him faithfully. But I would say that part of being fearfully and wonderfully made, like it says in Psalms 139, is understanding more about yourself and the way God didn't just make you in a sloppy manner. He made you in a very specific manner. And teleology is one of my favorite words, having to do with the purpose and meaning behind life. And it's much more than the biology that we tend to focus on. And I would say that brain typing helps us understand the meaning and purpose of our lives better. Like, God fashioned me this way, so therefore he must have something for me that's going to go along with that, to use my gifts. He's made me in a special way for a special calling. And it may be the background, it may not be the spotlight, but it's still something specific to how he's made me. And so I would say that that's the biggest way. And it also unburdens us to know, God made some people like Moses who didn't like to be in front of people, and other people like Paul who are all too willing to teach and preach. And so even understanding your particular brain type can help you to feel like God is pleased with you, even if you're not doing the great things that your neighbor is. He wants you to be faithful in the things that he made you good at, and not the things that are, necessarily. He might call you out of your comfort zone, but I think that can be really helpful too. We've seen a lot of people have a visible expression of relief to understand that, I've always had difficulty in this field, and now I understand why. And so it can be very freeing to know that God loves you just the way that He made you. and that he just wants you to be faithful in those gifts that he's given you.
Well, and I love your reference to Psalms 139 because it's, none of us are perfect. He's made us imperfectly perfect, and the only one that's perfect is God. And that
Right.
it's so important to know your strengths, your weaknesses, what you're good at, what you're not at, what your talents are, and stop wasting time in the areas he did not give you talents in, right?
Yeah.
Do you work with a lot of I'm fascinated now. I started really my practice in the 50 to 60-year-old demographic, which has now gone into more of the 30 to 40-year-old. And I'm still working with all. I'm fascinated by the youth now, right? Because they are our future and
Mhm.
they have so much more resources than any of us did 50, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, right back in the day. But I do feel like I'm like, if kids could take these kind of assessments, so I'm wondering if you have, students or clients of that nature, but when they're 14, 15, maybe 18, starting to apply for colleges and they're still molding into who they are, but I was like, man, if I knew my strengths and weaknesses a lot earlier on, I wouldn't have wasted so many times being in lanes that I should have not been in because I wasn't good at it. And
Mm.
I got frustrated and I got emotion, right? All these things that do you find or do you work with the younger demographic or leaning towards that?
Oh, certainly. I mean, parents and children is our forte. We can ascertain a brain type by the time they're 2 or 3 years old.
Really?
We
Okay.
evaluated all our children before the age of 1, which we can't do with everybody because we
And
spend
that
more.
had been behavioural because you can't have them take the assessment at two.
Right, behavioral and just their phenotype, just the expression of their genes, even
Sure.
facially and so on, are indicative of their type. So yes, starting early is great, but not if that pigeonholes them into areas that you talk about exploration, and maybe you would have liked it to be a little more efficient, a little more fine-tuned, maybe that would be helpful with regard to frustration over time. But I think maybe too, in God's providence, sometimes he uses that to balance people out. Maybe
Yeah.
to get, we've seen it where parents are very different from their children or vice versa. And is that an accident, or did God give them that to help them grow in areas that they might not have otherwise?
Yeah, like a
Uh,
lesson, right, in life too.
Right. And even when I mentioned Moses earlier, Moses was used in a capacity that you wouldn't have expected. So God gave him Aaron to help him. So we're also, hesitant to ever say, well, just because you're this type, you shouldn't go do this. No, we've seen exceptions in every area. I can tell you stories of athletes or professionals in business who have done well or succeeded in areas that their brain type was not conducive to that, but they just worked harder and gave, more effort, and it was harder for them to achieve, but for whatever reasons, that's what God had for them. Or it's hard to say how that happened, but
There's
so we
always those Hail Mary moments, right? I guess the best way.
right. So just be open to what God's leading you to do. This is what you can do more efficiently, but if you feel God's calling you to this other area, then have at it.
Sure, sure. I love it. Can you give us a brief overview of the stages of mental and physical development and why it's important to understand those stages?
So this is something my dad's more passionate about than I am, because I think it's interesting to look at how, if you look at the stages of human development mentally and physically, that there is a tangential connection to the brain types and how they behave. So we use the number system 1 through 16, and the one brain type and the 16 are poles apart. And if you look at an infant versus an adult, you can see that how they behave are poles apart as well. And so there's a connection there that my father, who's admittedly more scientifically minded than I am, I'm not the technician, I'm the practitioner. I would say my dad's more the technician. And so he identified that and found it to be perhaps telling about how God has made people. Even when Jesus said, "Unless you come as a child, you cannot come, to me." There's brilliance in that, and I think it's also helpful to understand that there are some people who really never go beyond the stages of 1, 2, 3, 4, like in infancy to toddlerhood, like in their thinking, the way that they approach life. And then there are others who are the 13, 14, 15, and 16 who have a very difficult time connecting with those who think more along the lines of a simple child. I'm cheapening the experience a little bit with how I'm describing it, but what I'm trying to say is that we have found that to be entirely true, that even if everyone in the room is an adult, when we talk to them about brain typing, some will fall asleep in 2 minutes and some will be taking notes and asking questions. And it's
Right.
really because that they think on that level in accordance with the developmental process of human beings from birth to maturity. So my dad found that really helpful to look at, and really only a few brain types would find that section interesting, and the rest would kind of just it would go over their head
Right.
as far as how that's to be applied like that.
Well, it's all helpful because I always tell everybody prepare yourself for the long game and work it backwards. So, if you
Hmm,
want to be successful in a relationship and you're single, read married books, learn and study. That was my
that's so
aha
good.
moment 16 years ago. I finally started reading marriage and relationship books to realize wait, this is what I should have read all along. This is why it hasn't worked. So that when I actually started then dating, I was applying those things and I was
Wow,
getting so much further ahead. So I wasn't wasting time because I read it
that's
backwards.
excellent.
So it's very cool. So
That's
once someone
wisdom.
is able to recognize both their genetically driven strengths and
Mhm.
weaknesses, what is the next step in growth, you would say?
Yeah, that's really the million-dollar question. We've had so many people say that to us. So if brain typing's true, like who cares? Like what should I do about it? Why does it matter? And I like to use the light bulb as an example. The light bulb was created by a non-Christian, and yet we don't need it, but we use it to our advantage because we can use the inventions of secular people. And Carl Jung wasn't a Christian, as far as I can tell, and yet his identification of different, preferences in people has been invaluable to those who will utilize it and think about it, and where we are today with the other contributions. So I would just say that the best thing is to live in that awareness of when you understand who you are and the people around you, what they are, rejoice in that. Let it give you confidence. Let it give you humility. At the same time, to be confident in how God's made you, and then to be humble in the areas where you know that you're not going to be as strong as other people are. You're not going to be as proficient as other people are, and that's okay. So I really would say that when life is hard, when we have stress, anxiety, trauma, worry, fears, when those things happen, it shakes us to our core. And that's when you really find out who you are, and then you find out what you turn to. So when everything's good and hunky dory, we're all the same. But when we have stress and pressure, then we revert to where our brain is strongest. And that's really where brain typing comes out the best, it's the most applicable at that point. And so I would just say that really the storms of life will come, and if you understand yourself rightly, then you won't be so confused when you're in those dark times and you're in those hard times, or you're having to make big decisions, that you'll really understand where your strengths are, and you won't be confused about that. So whether it's in a relationship or whether you're in a big game and it's 2 minutes to go at the end of the game, whatever it is, we can tell you like this is really where you're strongest, and you can have confidence in that, and it should give you an anchor or a compass to know how to handle the rest of what you're dealing with. So I think if we're all honest that when we get shaken, we don't even know where to look. We get shaken, and we should look to the Lord first. But I'm saying if we understand how He's made us and gifted us, and I didn't mention it earlier because it's kind of silly in one sense, but we have this forest friends analogy where we use 16 different mammals that live in the forest, and we use them as an example to show that if you understand you're a skunk or a squirrel or a bear or whatever it is, like you understand those are distinctions that are meaningful. And if you understand what you are, then you're not going to try to act like other creatures that God has made. And it's the same in the human realm that we're that different. A skunk and
Yeah.
a squirrel and a bear are very different.
Yeah.
And I'm here to say that that's how different people are. And in
Yeah.
fact, when we give the questionnaire that you talked about at the beginning, like, do we have a test for people? We've had people tell us they'll take the test that we do have and they'll say, this test is kind of ridiculous because people would only answer the questions one way. That's what they'll say to us. And we'll
Yeah.
say, no, we actually have people who answer every one of those questions differently than you have. And so
Yeah.
it's like, it's really a myopic way of thinking to think that people are just like you are. And there are a lot of people out there who think that way. When push comes to shove, they actually think that everyone's going to be hyper logical and consistent, or they're going to be super visceral and emotive and care, about that first. And it's just not the way that people are. They're very different.
Well, there are a lot of people I find all day long. I'm like, not everybody thinks like you. So get out of your own lane and try to see what's surrounding you, right? Instead of like, if
Yes.
you're quick to always make the same decisions that you think other people would make, you're always going to be in the same lane of your same situation over and over and over again.
Yes. Yes.
So how can people, I love all of this. I truly believe you and I could talk for probably 10 hours because I'm so passionate about the human brain, right? How can people find you? And please mention the book that you, maybe it's not out yet, or if you have a book or you're
I'm
writing.
working on that. Yeah. So my dad's been sick for a while. He's had cancer for almost 10 years.
Oh,
And
I'm
so
so
our materials have become outdated. And because we haven't needed them for our professional sports work, we just haven't produced them. And so we use a lot of our reports and so on to give the information to the teams we work with. But I'm presently working on just an overhaul of all of our information to make it practical for families, couples, children, individuals. And so that's a book I'm hoping to finish this spring to have available.
nice.
That
Okay.
will take, our last book was published in 2011, so it's been a while. And this will have the latest information, which will be so much better than what we've previously published and more practical. And I'm glad, I feel like in some ways, like Solomon with David, that God's made me differently from my dad to take this information and make it more practical than ever. And I think that's what, people's attention spans need nowadays. Is something that's, that they can, in the heat of the moment, can still remember. Because if people can't remember it quickly or easily, then they're not going to apply it. So
Right.
I'm the first to say that even if you think, there's a lot of people that I kind of jokingly say my dad used to make people think that he could walk on water because he would impress them with what he knew. But really, that doesn't help anybody. What helps people is that they can remember what you told them at the time of need, in the
Yeah.
time of, and that's one reason. I could go off on some speakers today who I feel do that. They have a big following, and it's because they are giving people the nuggets of truth they need in a way that they can digest. So,
Sure, 100%. So, how do people find you and your
yeah,
website? And when your book does come out, please send it to me because
sure.
we will make sure we promote it out to everybody
Oh,
that wants to
thanks.
go deeper than our
Yeah.
just surface questions that we ask with the Myers-Briggs and the love languages.
Yeah, so braintypes.com is our main website. Beyondpersonality.com is our sister site, which is more of my thing. And you know, I will say, like, with regard to the Myers-Briggs, that I always try to be keep abreast on what's going on in that community. And I did notice recently that according to the MBTI, the most common types in America are either the ISFJ or the ISTJ. And then a recent Harvard study, came out with the idea that the INFJ was the most prevalent according to their testing. And what's interesting is that according to our evaluation method, that actually those types are among the least found in society. And
Which is
so,
what? The ENFJ
well,
or all three of
the
those?
the back brain, left brain types are the least prolific in society in America,
Okay.
according to our experience that we've observed for 30 years. And so I bring that up because I want to appreciate the relationship we have with Myers-Briggs, but I also want to say that if you really want to get in the nuts and bolts of what we're measuring, then it's a shocking thing for me to realize that they're saying these types are the most prolific, where we're saying they're actually some of the least found in society, and it's really something because I think what people want to be is they want to be mysterious and enigmatic, and so they want to be back-brained introverts, and they want to be dependable, like a judger, they call it, the left brain dominant people are. And so they've sort of, maybe job security or things like that, or the process they go through in evaluations, when they do their resumes and so on, cause them to take a certain identity. I'm not exactly what to make of it, but I think that people have been socially encouraged to identify themselves that way. But I think that if they could be freed, I think brain typing can free you to be who you are, and you don't have to fall in line with what society says is acceptable. I think that's the reason why people test out that way, is what I'm trying to say. Is I don't think they're being dishonest. I think they're like, it's almost like the roles that their vocations have required have caused them to see themselves in that vein, or something along those lines, because it's just shockingly different the way that when we see those numbers that they put out. I'm just, in my mind, that it's a great disparity that needs to have some explanation behind it.
Well, and it's funny because when we get results back, somebody could say, "Oh, mine was so different than the one before," and I said, "Well, did you take it while you were at work, or did you take
Uh,
it on your weekend when there was nothing else going on in your life and you took it more personal?" Which, I mean, I don't know.
yeah.
You can get into the details of that, but I do say sometimes it's the environment of where you're trying to psychoanalyze your own
Yes.
answers, which I always say, don't overthink it, just answer. Right?
Yes.
You know? So I
Yes.
so grateful that you have joined us. And anybody that wants to dive deeper or be evaluated by Jeremy and his team, Please write in, ask us questions. We'll connect you to him. I can't wait till your book is out to share with more of our audience. But this is the one area that I feel when everybody says, what do I do with this? Or how do I do that? I'm like, start with your own God-given brain that God designed you to be. And I just love what you're doing. So I'm so grateful that you joined us today. Any questions anybody has, I hope we can write in and maybe ask you or have you back on another podcast with more specific questions from our audience.
Sure, that's great. I'm really nothing special in and of myself. It's just that I've lived this information, and so my brain type is not one to want to talk about it. It's one to want to just apply it. So you can even
So
take
what is your Myers-Briggs?
the Myers-Briggs is they call it the ISTJ.
Okay.
So it's really a challenge for me to get up in front of people and talk. I only do it because I believe in it, and I feel like this is a calling that God's given. Otherwise, we have other people that are involved in our work who should be at the face of our work, who the entertaining people. But I'm kind of a quality control kind of person. So
That's okay.
so really, it's better for me to write the book and then put it in the hands of people who can share it in a exciting way.
I love it. Well, that's what we are here for. God designed us all uniquely different that we've been talking about so that we can spread the word he has for us through all of us. So
Yeah.
I hope you have a blessed rest of your week. Our audience does too. And we love these chats that we have. So we'll continue that. And maybe when your book's out, we'll have somebody else on here too, sharing more.
Sure, sure.
I hope you have a blessed week. God
Thank
bless.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, God bless you too. Thank you.
It's been another great talk on this episode of One True Talks by Renee Rochelle. I look forward to our next chat. Please write in your questions and comments so I can be sure to talk about whatever it is you want to discuss in our next upcoming episode. Lots of love. God bless. XOXO.